In Genesis 3, sin entered the world through the actions of Adam and Eve, and shortly thereafter, the two were expelled from the Garden of Eden. As the consequences of their sin unfolded before them, God also turned his attention to the serpent, saying, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." But who is this offspring? I think that even in Genesis 3, in the moments after man was separated from God by sin, God's solution was already starting to unfold. The offspring that would crush the serpent's head, undoing all of his devices, is none other than the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, who would be born both fully God and fully man, solely capable of atoning for the sin of every human since Adam and Eve first disobeyed God in the garden. But for the Son of Man to be born, history and genealogy would have to first unfold. Jesus had to be born of somebody. The book of Genesis provides us with key information regarding God's plan to bless the whole earth and redeem mankind from the grip of sin. It begins in earnest with Abram. In Genesis 15, God tells Abram, "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you're able to number them. So shall your offspring be." Later, God would reaffirm this covenant, changing Abram's name to Abraham, as he would become the father not just of one nation, but of many nations. Abraham had tried to fulfill the promise himself through the conception of Ishmael, but God's plan was that Abraham and Sarah would conceive an heir even in their old age. When they did, and later gave birth, Isaac became the heir of God's promise. Yet the multitude of God's people were slow in coming. One son did not make a multitude. Isaac, in turn, had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Though Jacob was younger, he was foreordained by God to continue the advancement of God's promise. After stealing his brother's birthright and his blessing, he fled to Padan Aram, where through a twist of fate and the deception of his uncle, he married two competing wives. The dysfunction between the wives led to the inclusion of two of their servants as Jacob's concubines, with the result being 12 sons born from 4 mothers, all sons of Jacob. Upon his return to the land of his birth, Jacob wrestled with God and had his name changed symbolically to Israel. God was poised to multiply the descendants of Abraham, and in so doing, to propagate his own name throughout the earth. The dysfunction in Jacob's family caused Joseph, his second youngest son, and the favorite, to be placed in slavery in Egypt. During his captivity, Joseph continued to trust in the God of his father, and was eventually used to save his entire family from famine. Following this rescue, the book of Genesis closes with the sons of Israel settling in Egypt and beginning to multiply in earnest. Exodus, the next book of the Pentateuch, tells of how Israel, now grown into this multitude, left Egypt. They would make their way to Canaan, the land of their forefathers, and there establish a nation, driving out several of their pagan neighbors. Centuries later, the people would be unified into a kingdom first under Saul and then under David. During the reign of David's son Solomon, a great temple would be built, a testament to God's personhood and glory for all the world to come and be blessed. This is a temporary fulfillment of God's initial promise. Centuries beyond that, in a time when Israel as a political entity no longer existed, and when God's people had been scattered through a series of captivities and a diaspora throughout the Gentile world, a child was born from the line of Judah in Bethlehem. Through this child, God would offer atonement to the world, fulfilling his curse on the serpent and his covenant promise to Abraham. Through Jesus, all nations of the world would be gathered to God, whether Jew or Gentile, and thus the promise of Genesis was brought to fulfillment in Christ.